In this video, we're exploring the Hario water distribution tool. Welcome, my name is Patrick Rolfe and this is Coffee with April. For this episode, we are exploring this little thing, basically a water distribution tool from Hario. And we tried a few different water distribution tools on this channel. We used one of them here on the bar for a quite short time. My general kind of critique towards it is the lack of turbulence when we brew, right? And I often find that a lack of turbulence generates these kind of very flat, not so nuanced cup of coffee that are maybe not so interesting actually. But we're always happy to kind of try something new. This is obviously designed to fit on a V60. However, we tried it quite a lot of times on our plastic brewer and find that that's kind of interesting. So instead of using a V60, which we don't really use here, we're using an April plastic, new generation, new plastic, much better quality than the original one to brew with. A little bit of a side note is that this does not fit on, for example, the ceramic version, because the ceramic version is not as exact as the plastic. So if you want to try to use this on the April Brewers, you need to get yourself one of those. So basically what we're going to do is just walk you through how we're brewing with this. Then we're going to take a quick break, have a little bit of a tasting, and then get back to you with some kind of review. Also, naturally compare this with all of the other tools that we've been using as well in terms of water distribution. So the coffee that we're using today is a natural processed geisha, fresh crop, from the Cerro Sul farm in Colombia. A coffee that we have part of our limited box for quite some time now. I used the Sudan Rumé from the same producer when I won the Swedish Barista Championship. And what we're doing now is that we're dosing 13 grams of coffee. We're grinding it a tiny bit finer than what we would do brewing without the distribution tool. The reason for this is because, again, we find we have less turbulence. So if you use the same grind size, we're not going to get the required strength that we want, right? So we got the coffee in. We're putting the distributor on top. It actually fits perfectly using the April paper filter as well, which is a little bit lower. So we're zeroing that. The water sits at 93 degrees Celsius. We're going to start with a 30 gram center pour. I often find you actually have to pour a little bit slower. And then we move over to just basically 70 grams on the outer side of the distribution tool. So we're still going to do 100 and 100 pour. But again, I find this pouring, because you need to be a little bit more specific, it's actually going to be a little bit slower than what we're used to. Also because the inside of the distribution tool is kind of limiting you in terms of how much water you can pour at the same time. We'll let that sit for 35 seconds. And then I'm going to repeat this pour identical to the initial pour. So we're starting with a 30 gram center pour. That takes 5 seconds. I move out and I pour 70 grams in the outer side. Obviously pouring is a lot easier. It becomes a lot more consistent, which is interesting. Finishing that pour here, and now we're just basically gonna let it draw down, right? So this is one of the advantages with a distribution tool. One can argue that it becomes a little bit mechanical. You kind of lose some of the romance behind brewing coffee. But the real kind of question here is, does it actually make the coffee tastier? I think one of the things that are interesting here is that, one, the hulls are very consistent. So it seems like the flow is actually really consistent throughout the whole part of the distribution tool. There are some distribution tools on the market where the hulls are actually not consistent. So you actually have a quite uneven flow throughout the bed, which is not so good. It kind of defeats the whole purpose, right? So very kind of fast, even flow. This coffee, being a natural geisha, also has a very, very fast drawdown in general. And I find that whenever you use this kind of tool, you actually have a much faster drawdown in general, right? Which could be both positive or negative. A big reason for that, again, is the fact that we have a lot less turbulence, right? So the water goes through a lot faster. Especially here now, when, if we say we compare it to espresso, we would tap the puck to make sure that that water basically went through a little bit more consistent with a little bit more consistency. Here we don't, right? So that's why we have water going through relatively quickly. So we have a total brew time here of 2 minutes and 10 seconds, which is very much on the faster side, which doesn't really matter, especially with this coffee because it's so aromatic and we're going to actually get quite a lot of strength out of it as well. But what we're going to do now is going to take a quick short break, do a little bit of tasting, do a little bit of measuring, and then come back with a little bit of feedback on this Hario distribution tool. So we're back. We brewed the coffee, we tasted the coffee, did a little bit of measurements here, and well, kind of what we're getting is what we discussed earlier in the video as well, right? I find this continuously. We also brewed this coffee without the distribution tool earlier today, and the thing is, without it, you seem to have a little bit more complexity, a little bit better kind of harmony and composition of those taste notes. So we find kind of again and again that when we're working with any kind of distribution tool like this, sure, we perhaps get a better uniformity or a more even flow rate to the coffee bed. In theory, I'm sure that's true. It just doesn't really taste very good. And then the question goes, does that make sense, right? It's kind of when you try to find these uniform grind sites, which again is a little bit of a myth, unless you go completely bananas on some kind of sifting tool. What happens is that you end up with these kind of really flat, unstructured cups of coffee. And that's just not necessarily to my liking. So I'm going to go and say that in the world of distribution tools, it's an interesting one. And I'm sure working with, for example, a V60 is a good thing to avoid bypass and so on. And it's probably one of the favorite distribution tools that I've tried. It's super easy to use. It's very consistent. I like that it's one level, so I don't feel that I'm losing too much temperature when I'm brewing. But I still tend to gravitate again towards brews done without a distribution tool in terms of finding those really tasty cups of coffee. Now, that being said, we're always really interested to hear what you think about distribution tools. What are you using? We had the different Gabby ones here before on the channel. Is there anything we're missing? Is there something out there that is really interesting and maybe allows for a little bit of turbulence and even distribution at the same time? That would be really cool to see. As per always, we're taking this conversation to Patreon. We're taking this little thing and sending it to someone at Patreon as well. So if you want to be a part of that journey, then just sign up. Also, an extra little note on, I've been starting already to post and talk a lot more about my own barista journey or World Barista Cup journey on the Patreon channel. So for those of you that want a little bit of insight there, sign up. And then you can kind of be a part of that journey and see that process unfold. With that, we want to thank you very much for watching and wish you a great day. We want to give a special thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. It's because of you that we are able to continue to make these videos. And we want you all to feel free to always come with suggestions and ideas on the content that you want to see because we are doing this for you and because of you. Thank you from all of us here at April.